The pharmaceutical industry is a complex and fascinating field. It takes countless of people to bring a high-quality product to the market. In the Qualitalks podcast, I bring to you leaders, experts, and innovators who will share their experiences and explain to us how they do it. Welcome to the Qualitalks podcast. I'm Milek, your host, and my guest today is Daniel Milek. Daniel is a computer system validation expert, and today we are going to talk about this topic of computer system validations. He is going to give tips how to be better in this, how to choose the vendors, what mistakes to avoid when choosing a computer system for your processes, and he'll give a lot of tips how to write good user system requirements and protocols. So let's get to it. Hi Daniel, welcome back to the Qualitalks podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Jan. Good to be back after our recent data integrity talk. Check it out, guys. Good talk on Qualitalks, YouTube, and LinkedIn.
It was a great talk, and we wanted to continue that because at the end we said, okay, the data integrity is the first part. Now you need to validate it. So we talked about the policies and the governance and why it's important and so on, and now we came to the conclusion. Good. Now you need to verify that it works, and that's what we want also to touch today and go to the computer system validation, how it works, why it's important, and so on, right? So Daniel, why is computer system validation is so important nowadays?
Well, you know, it's really a case of the pervasiveness of software within the pharmaceutical industry, really. You know, as the years have gone on, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a definite movement away from paper records and paper processes to electronic software processes. Software packages have become much more sophisticated, allowing many processes to go almost totally paperless or in some cases have gone totally paperless with sophisticated interfaces and so on. So of course, there needs to be confidence that those processes, whether it's laboratory or operationally in the factory, the output of those processes, you know, it could be lab testing data or factory management of factory systems, the company who is operating those systems can have full confidence in the output of those systems, so that it can be said with certainty or a high degree of sureness that the system is producing the intended or expected results.
How is the computer system validation is different from other process validations that are so established in the pharmaceutical industry?
The biggest part of the work, I was going to say I think, but I know after many years' experience, is in the tailoring of the software settings. That's where the real, you know, a lot of people think of CSV as a bit of a dark art, and I suppose in some ways it is, because to really get the best out of a system, you really have to know the software and the IT infrastructure aspects of a system to really be able to tailor the settings. So, you know, there's a trick in knowing and understanding all of those elements. So, you know, it's quite tricky because the person who's doing the work or the people doing the work, they need to have experience really as from a user's perspective. They need to understand the IT elements of the process, and, you know, all the data integrity aspects of the process, and then also be able to bring that all together to configure a system and then obviously to validate. So it's kind of a challenging, difficult to find skill set. So to be able to execute CSV well, it can be pretty challenging, and of course, working cross-functionally as well is required within the business to get it done. So there's a project management aspect to it as well.
So last time we also talked about the multidisciplinary team that should be put on the decision of data integrity, and there should be people who know the system because they can play with it, and they really need to have the knowledge and the interest to dig in and to find the loopholes in the system and so on. Do you believe that right now the people in the pharmaceutical industry who work on the CSV are not qualified enough really to do it?
I think it's difficult to find people with the right skills for sure. And I think if a company doesn't have people who bring all of that to the mix. So for example, in my case, I was working in a lab for many years. I was a lab manager. I worked on bringing new systems into the laboratories. So I've seen it from the users, the bench analysts perspective, and then I taught myself, and with the help of others, to an extent, the IT aspects of systems introduction, and then made the move into validation. So I kind of bring all of the elements required to introduce a new system. But I am quite rare, I think, not to sound like I'm magnificent. Maybe I am. You can say that. Let's say that. But yeah, a lot of companies don't have people with all of those skills. So then it becomes a case of people having to work as teams, I think, and then working cross-functionally to ensure that all of those things are covered. So it's definitely a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And then the more complex and tailorable, configurable a system is, the more challenging it is.
How did you choose this path?
So I was working as a lab manager, and it was during a period where there was a lot of budget sign-off for replacement of old legacy systems. And so over the period of about 2 or 3 years, virtually almost all of the lab place with more modern, more configurable, more compliant systems. And there just simply wasn't anyone around to do it. So, I wanted to do something different. I'd been, working in the labs for many years, so I fancied a change. And just told my boss at the time that I'll do it. I'll take care of it. So I did a bit of reading up on data integrity, validation. Spoke to the right people. Went to some good seminars as well, including the GAMP forums and some data integrity seminars. So yeah, just sort of made that transition out of necessity, really, for the company that I was at the time.
Then you understood that this is the right thing for you, and it's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, I quite enjoy the work. I also saw very early on that, because of the cross-functional working that we've already mentioned, and the need to be able to drive things forward and get things done. Managing the vendors as well, even down to deciding what to buy and negotiating price, all of that side of things. I could see that there was a big project management element to the work as well. So at that time, I did the Prince 2 project management course and took the exams and became a project, officially a project manager. So yeah, it was just, I think like most people in their careers, part circumstance, necessity, seeing an opportunity. And then when I started doing the work, I realized I was pretty good at it, or at least people were telling me that I was pretty good at it. And just never look back, really.
What is your advice for companies that want to train people to understand CSV a bit better? Where is the shortage? What should they do to make sure that all the people that work with equipment have the knowledge and understanding? Because I think that we talked about that. Let's start with when we talked about data integrity. We said that. Some people lack the knowledge to understand what shouldn't be done, and also some managers lack the knowledge to find the loopholes, and they are not even aware that some employees know about the loopholes because they themselves lack the knowledge to look for them to understand it. So what should people learn, know, what should be more in the practice, what should be more learned about? So in GMP you learn a lot about documentation and so on, but I think not so much about CSV. So you sometimes you have some seminar about it, but you don't really get your hands dirty, and you learn nothing practical basically if you're not really working in the field.
Yeah, and it's definitely true. There's only so much you can gain from going to a seminar. Although some of them are really good. But yeah, for someone who has, or for a company that's never really done in-house CSV and systems configuration work before, of course they lack, the people that are thinking about doing the work then can't picture it and can't put it into context that way. I've never seen a typical like factory system or laboratory software package in terms of going into the really deep settings and how those settings can be tailored and how a workflow can be crafted and refined and then validated. Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one. I would say certainly do read the data integrity literature that's out there. Go to the seminars. Some of the seminars actually, the people that go to them are very knowledgeable, and in like the Q&As or even during the lunch break, some of the most useful information can be found then just by talking to people who do it. But yeah, there's no real substitute for having someone show you how it's done. And I mean, certainly at the moment, I'm working with a company and going through the process of showing their permanent staff, because I'm there as a contractor, showing their permanent staff, how I do it and what needs to be considered and thought about and how it's all should be documented and evidenced, in terms of the configuration management, the testing, the use of good quality validation test scripts with appropriate screenshot evidence and all of that side of things. I would say that wherever possible, certainly, I mean, this sounds like shameless self-promotion, but if you can get hold of a contractor like me, who has been doing the work for years with that experience, to try and get them in, even if it's just for a couple of days, to give some training. That's definitely uh, a big boost for companies looking to do their own in-house CSV.
And when you go to those companies and you explain to them how things work, do you find that they're sometimes surprised about some of the things that you tell them that you think that this should be obvious, and you see, okay, they should have known that, or it's surprising that they don't know that because it could lead to so many problems with the regulators?
Yeah, all of that actually. Yeah, mix. So some surprise, and sort of a revelation. Oh, now we understand why it takes so long. Now we understand why you have to consider this and consider this, and take the administration of the system away from the lab people and configure the user roles, and why um, why you have to show this level of evidence in the validation. Certainly, once you tell them about some audit experiences that you've had, where you've been sat with an auditor and they've said things like, "Show me the configuration." How have you proven that the users cannot do this? And then, of course, in that audit situation, you need to prove the claims that are made about a process and a system. So yeah, a bit of a wake-up call in a lot of cases, and I've found that the people that you talk to in that way, they go away, they come out of it with much more of an appreciation of why it needs to be done, and how it should be done.
So what are the biggest misconceptions?
That qualification is validation. That's probably the biggest. That perception that we buy a new system, the vendor comes in, runs a few tests, and then it's ready to go, ready to use. No. Most often not the case. Virtually always not the case. Qualification is some rudimentary tests that are run to prove that some functions of a system are working as expected or as desired. Typically the software package that comes with the system, whether it's factory or lab, there's hardly any tailoring that's gone on. The optimized workflow isn't there. Sometimes the software is really just an empty shell as it's qualified. The vendor may do a communications test to ensure that the software is operating the instrument or the machine in the factory, and that's about it. No user roles or no refined user roles, no segregation of data, no data standards, no optimized workflow, no challenging of the audit trails to prove that they are accurate and thorough. Maybe no tailored and optimized reports, no automated calculations set up for reporting. The reports may be quite lacking. So there's a lot of work to do, usually an awful lot of work to do after qualification. So that's probably the biggest one. That users, particularly the users, assume that because the vendor comes in and does some basic tests that's good enough for the system to then be used. Not the case.
So in your opinion, companies trust the documents that they get from the manufacturer, the supplier, too much, and they trust them to provide them all the validation documents, and that the system is ready for use, plug and play, but it's not the case. And I do think that many really fail to understand that they also need to do a lot of in-house testing and validation, and not only just rely on the manufacturer's documentation.
Yeah, and really that is the expectation in the industry. Why would you? I mean, no disrespect to the vendors. I mean, some of the vendors that I've worked with over the last quite a few years now, are fantastic. And the products are great. Not always, but most often. Um, you can't really trust a vendor to tell you that their product's great. Of course, they're going to tell you it's great. Um, but the level of testing that they do is not nowhere near sufficient. Anyway. So that's really the main thing. But yeah, even down to we talked about qualification. There's quite a lot from what I've seen, quite a lot of customers not even reviewing the vendor's qualification protocols before the installation's done. And then months down the line, users, managers having to sit down in an audit, and then with the vendor qualification on the desk or on the screen, because the auditor's requested to see it, and then the auditor is asking somebody to explain the qualification. And quite often the vendor qualifications are they don't really have much rationale quite often to explain all the tests. So then there's that embarrassing time in an audit where the person being asked to explain the qualification can't do it, because the qualification is just test result without really any explanation as to what the test is for, or how the acceptance criteria have been set as they have. Why is that an appropriate test? So yeah, a lot of trust of the vendors, probably too much trust quite often, even down to deciding what to buy. A lot of that is done on too much trust with the vendors, I think. Really, the only way to know if a system is going to be okay for you is to get your hands on it and try it yourself. Get a demo, get it on site, or at least go to the vendor and spend a day or two, using it.
Mm-hmm. And do the vendors open with that and provide such demos, or you really need to ask for that?
Yeah, the good ones will. Sometimes it takes, most often it takes some organization, of course, but yeah, if the vendors are serious about selling you something and they're a good vendor, yeah, of course they will.
Yeah, because I think it's a really important thing to really test the system, test the software, because you are not buying a shoe, right? So you need to make sure that it functions well with your system, and that you need to make sure it provides all the settings you need, and it can have all the customizations you need, or not to have customizations that you really need to avoid, and so on. So you really need to be hands-on, bring operators that will be using the system and play with it, really to make sure that it's a good software for your processes. Because otherwise, if you buy it, it's really difficult to change it. So first of all, you buy it, you need to validate it and qualify everything. It takes so much time, and then suddenly you realize, okay, it doesn't work for us, and then you just wasted so much time and money, and you cannot do anything because it's too late, right? So it really makes sense, and it doesn't matter nowadays when you go and buy any service, you usually get some demo and some trial. So it's a good idea really to ask for it. And what are the stages? So let's say you have chosen software to be used in the quality control or the production. So what would be the steps to validate it? So first of all, before you buy, test it. What's then?
Yeah, so good URS, user requirement specification, make it clear what the hardware requirements are and what the software requirements are in terms of usability and compliance features. To do then some sort of study of the system. So, many companies will call that a DQ, design qualification. Some companies will call it a pilot study. Hands-on, ideally, assessment of the system, the software, the functions, the features, what can be tailored, what can't be tailored, and so on. And then in terms of the validation, to have a good validation plan is essential. To state what the system is for, its intended uses, and then how, based on the intended use or uses, what validation is going to be done and why. Also, a validation assessment as well can go with that, to really define, to state what the validation deliverables should be. Also, what GAMP category the system may fall in. And then, to state the amount of the deliverables and the rigor required to then have a good output in terms of a validated system that can be used for the intended application or applications. So yeah, good validation assessment, good validation plan, and then good configuration management needs to come after that. So the tailoring of any software settings, the all of the IT infrastructure, so PCs involved in the system, the server side of things, if that's involved, cloud solutions may be involved. All of the tailored settings need to be captured, documented, screenshot everything, so that someone picking up that configuration document in the future can easily follow it. So yeah, a good configuration document, whatever form that may come in. Sometimes it's appropriate to use spreadsheets to, if you've got like a factory system with PLCs, HMI, and multiple manufacturing vessels, can be quite useful to use, process mapping type software packages to really give you a schematic, and then quite often just a Word document as well to capture settings. So whatever is required to show all of the configured settings. And then, in terms of executing validation tests, to have good validation test scripts. And obviously SOPs as well. So once the optimal configuration has been decided, the SOPs will come from that as well, in consultation with the users. So SOPs, guidance documents, whatever is required. Really a good idea to have a separate administration SOP as well for whoever's going to be administering the system. It's important. And then, good validation summary report to summarize all of the validation, requirements traceability matrix to track all of the testing and then tie in the testing with user requirements. So that brings it all together. And really the most important thing, whatever claims we're making about a system, it needs to be shown. So, for example, if we're making the claim that the laboratory user role of super user can do these things within the system, but cannot do these things within the system, as an example, that needs to be evidence. And if the evidence isn't there, how can you demonstrate to an auditor that is true?
So you need to show that the lab technician cannot do this or that, he cannot access those on those files, and you need to demonstrate that this setting is grayed out, or he just doesn't have an access with screenshots or whatever to show that the settings are blocked. And so you mentioned a lot of steps, and it sounds a lot of work, and it is a lot of work, and it's not that easy, and I think also people sometimes take it too lightly, because sometimes you also need to do so much work also for an Excel sheet with macros that it's sometimes when you have a huge manufacturing equipment, and you need to do validation, so people take it really seriously because it's a part of the whole manufacturing process. It's a really huge machine, and it's a big software, but sometimes they just overlook like small equipment, small software that has an output that really can jeopardize the whole data integrity or and everything. So they just don't think, okay, we need to do so much work for one Excel sheet or some small software. But you'll need to do it in some cases. So I don't know if you want to talk about GAM5, maybe you can address it shortly. But let's say we talked at first, you go with the user requirements, and you said, okay, let's have good user requirements. What is a good user requirement? Because we talked about it a bit in our last podcast, that sometimes you said people write only one sentence. I want the software to be pink, I don't know, or to give me that output, but they do it like in one sentence, and usually it's not enough. So what is a good user requirement specification?
Yeah, so I suppose it's useful to think about what is a bad one. So in our last talk on data integrity, I used that example. Well, I've seen this in a URS, which doesn't really look like a URS. It's kind of like a 2-page minimum, but people will know what I'm talking about. Where it will just say something like, there's quite a bad URS will be like quite a lot of hardware requirements, and then the software is just like one requirement that says must comply with CFR 21 Part 11. And it's like, right, okay, well, what about everything else?
So, for example, CFR, what should be part of it usually?
Yeah, I mean, it's important, of course, but CFR 21 Part 11 is about.
No, I mean, what else should they really put in? What's usually missing?
Yeah, so good URS requirements are very, the granularities there. So, for example, a simple example would be that the audit trails are detailed and capture all key user actions, and that the audit trail cannot be edited or deleted. That's a simple one.
Mm-hmm. So basically, just don't say CFR Part 11, explain in details what the software should do and what it shouldn't do. And usually you probably need to look at the manual of the software and really address each point, because usually sometimes there are software, but you use only 10% of it for your purpose. But then you need to address the other 90% and say why it's not applicable and why nobody has access to it and why nobody should have access to it.
Yeah, and even things like the all of the items in the URS, they don't all have to be must-have requirements. Sometimes they're just would likes, but put them in. So, for example, a would like would be uh, user accounts can be linked to the business uh, Windows accounts via LDAP or Windows AD groups. Not essential because you could still administer the user accounts for the system software from within whatever administration features the system software has. Um, but ideally, it would be nice to be able to link in with the user's Windows account so the credentials are the same and dynamically linked, so that the user accounts perfectly align with the company's Windows account policies and so on. I mean, for example, so for the URS, the software URS that I have, that is my company URS template that I use, um, for the software requirements, there are about 35 separate requirements, which is obviously very different to the must comply with CFR 21 R11.
So you really need to assess what you need, and it's really good to think about all the aspects that you say, because sometimes there are many software that you bring that they don't integrate well with your Windows accounts, and then you must have different passwords for each software, and it brings more difficulty to track it, to make sure that everything works well.
Yeah.
So it's really good idea to really think about convenience. That maybe sometimes
Yeah.
people forget about convenience.
Convenience, yeah. I mean, even simple things like the software must be compatible with Windows 10. If your company's moved away from, say, Windows 7 and is no longer used, what if the software you're thinking of buying isn't compatible with Windows 10, only 7? Things like that. People can get caught out very easily with things like that. What if the software isn't compatible with your Windows server version? All kinds of things. So really, all of the infrastructure, IT infrastructure side of things needs to be considered. You've got to ensure that the software is compatible with your IT setup within your business. And then, yeah, all of the compliance features, audit trails, configurable user roles, segregation of data, suitable data location, the system files cannot be edited or deleted, that there are e-signatures, that those e-signatures, once applied, lock the process results or test, yeah, and to really separate out those requirements is really important. And then, of course, if you do a good job with the URS, then it's a lot easier further down the line to demonstrate that you have tested all of those, tested the software and the system to prove that all of those features are there. So then it makes your life a lot easier with a good URS later on when you write the requirements traceability, so that you can show that this CSV test proves that that user requirement is met. And when it's done well, it's almost a pleasure to discuss it with an auditor if it's done well, because the auditor sees what you've done as a good job, and the auditor's perception of that is that you're doing good work and good CSV, and that you're in control of your processes.
Exactly. And you said also what's important, of course, is the validation plan. So what are examples for bad validation plans, and what is usually missing from a validation plan?
To be honest, I've never really seen a terrible validation plan. I mean, it's always good just to see one at all. Some companies don't do a validation plan. They just go straight into the configuration part of the work. So, being clear what the deliverables are, what documents need to be produced, and why, who's going to do the work, who will approve the various documents and stages, and even up front, actually being able to give document references within the plan. If the documents, the draft documents are generated at that stage, then why not, state the document references so it's all nice and traceable. And of course, to take some of the pain away from that, the DQ is a top tip. If you use an Excel spreadsheet for your URS with maybe an accompanying approvals document, your DQ can just be the URS with an extra column. The column that says how you've demonstrated that requirement is there with, that function is there.
You have some more tips like that, how people can do the process easily, with such small adjustments?
A one good tip that comes to mind straight away is if the software that you have has good configurable reporting, so whether it's a lab report, from a lab test or factory process, try and tailor the reports to include all of the information that you would want to check, process by process, because that can save you the trouble of having to interrogate audit trails on a regular basis. Quite often reports are tailorable to the point where you can include everything that you might want to check within the report. And then, of course, you can do a validation test script to show that the information in question perfectly tallies with what's in the audit trail or audit trails. So yeah, and then of course you make the resultant process easier then by cutting out the step of having to check the audit trails every time you use the system. I mean, you may still want to do it periodically as part of an annual self-inspection or something like that. So that's a good tip. Having admin SOPs.
Many companies select those SOPs.
Yeah, they do. So the sort of things that would be included in there are obviously management of user accounts, how to manage any sort of system-specific things that may arise. Some software packages have, let's say, features, maybe bugs that maybe throw up problems once in a while. So how to deal with those. Sometimes the users can make mistakes, and then the software can be put into a state that may need some, they may need some assistance to correct it. How to manage updates to license files as new systems are added to a network, things like that, all sorts of things. And of course, those things are, the factory, your average factory or lab user doesn't need to know about that stuff. So why have it in their SOP? And then likewise, whoever's administering the system, they don't necessarily know how to need training how to use it on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, segregation of responsibilities is important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good tip. Thank you. And Daniel, do you think that we should also talk about GAM 5?
Yeah. So there's sort of there's a temptation to well, not from me, but I've certainly seen at some companies where the GAMP categories of software, that people can get a bit bogged down in trying to pigeonhole a software, and then saying, well, because it's this category, we'll only do this in terms of testing. I would, avoid that. But the GAMP categories can be useful. There can be a bit of a grey area sometimes between what is a Category 3 system and what is a Category 4 system. So, for example, a laboratory software package that runs gas chromatography or some gas chromatography system. So, a chromatography data system software package. Some companies may classify that as a Category 3 software. Some would categorize it as a Category 4 software every time. But then again, the deliverables in terms of what work needs to be done to configure that software and then test it for CSV, the deliverables, whether it's a Category 3 or 4, would typically be the same. So does it really matter? Well, yeah, it matters, but what's really important is that the rigor is appropriate in terms of how much effort goes into configuring the software and then testing it. That's what's really important. And really, GAMP has made that shift in more recent years away from that sort of rigorous, prescriptive, classification of systems, more to a risk-based approach. It's really more important to consider, well, what are you using the system for? And then, you should do testing that is appropriate in terms of, what is the use of that system, ultimately, what is the risk to the patient? So, comes down to patient safety. Whether it's in a clinical setting or that you're using the system to test a product that goes to market, a medicinal product that goes to market. So yeah, GAMP 5 is certainly very useful, absolutely. And provided that it's used as a guidance, there's no replacement for common sense. And really, companies should be doing their own sort of risk assessment and risk management, and documenting within their own in-house documents as to what testing is appropriate because of the use of that system.
So how can companies recognize how deeply they need to go into the risk analysis? So GAM 5 helps with categorizing the system and gives some guidance what to do when you have class 5, 4, 3, and 1. But as you said, really important right now is the risk-based approach. So people who don't have so much experience, how can they really determine where they should put their energy into?
So really what's key is, a good process map. So how the system will be used. Any sort of what I would describe as data transaction hotspots within the process. So input into the system, any transcription steps in terms of the users inputting sample data, any data transactions within the system are need extra attention. And so, of course, the process needs to be defined and well understood. And then, wherever there are any potential, let's say, sort of risk areas in terms of data integrity, that then those points in the process must be tested thoroughly through CSV. So wherever data is entered, any calculations that are done, any reporting that's done needs to be thoroughly tested. So it's really a case of identifying where those data integrity risks may be, wherever it is in that process, and then for that to be documented, and then to be able to demonstrate that you have executed CSV testing that addresses where those risks may be, and really to demonstrate that you've reduced the risk or eliminated the risk through the configuration wherever possible, to prevent users from doing certain actions. For example, it eliminates risk. Sometimes you have to accept risk because the software may not have the functions within it to prevent users from doing certain things. But then to be transparent about that and state that within the CSV, if that sort of weakness persists, and then it may be that you can control that through procedure rather than software controls, and to be clear about that as well within the CSV. Maybe not, bring it to the attention of the users that there is this weakness in the software, but certainly to give them a procedure that makes sure that any deficiencies that are left because the software is not that capable are taken care of through good procedure.
So when you do the risk analysis, does it make sense to bring the vendor, some expert from the vendor side to the table to sit with you and think about all the risks and maybe point out something that you didn't know about the system?
Yeah, and absolutely. So, if we sort of think about the stage where you've bought a system that you think is going to be good, you have it on site, you're deep into the configuration work, tailoring all the settings. Absolutely, email the vendor, ring the vendor, get them to come and see you if they're willing to do that, so that you can have as much input from them as possible if it's useful to get the best configuration, the best workflow, and the best security features in place before a system is validated. And of course, important to think about what we're actually validating. It's qualification will sort of verify certain functions of a system, whether that's vendor or in-house qualification. But really, when we talk about CSV, it is validation. And of course, we do the software tests, but really what we're validating is the entire process. Everything, not just the software functions, but also the IT infrastructure that's in place and the procedures that go with the use of the system. We are talking about CSV, but really what we're validating is the process. And it just happens that, in 2020, a large amount of that process is the software because that's the age that we live in. But really what we're validating is the whole process. So yes, the software configuration may be fantastic, but the procedures must be fantastic as well. And the supporting IT infrastructure also needs to be good. It's the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. That's
And
a
then
great point.
just thinking about GAM5, Um, I don't think I sent you a picture of this, Jan. And I know you don't like me holding things up or anyone holding things up in these
No,
talks,
it's
but I'm just
okay.
going to do
Do it.
it once if that's okay.
Yeah, no
Because
problem.
there is GAMP5, um, the book that everyone's familiar with in GAMP5. But in terms of laboratory systems, a lot of people don't know there is actually a laboratory version of that of GAMP5. So the title of it is a risk-based approach to GXP compliant laboratory computerized systems. So this has got um, you know, a specific view on laboratory systems. So that's really useful.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing this. It's important information.
Yeah, and also I did send you a screenshot of a very good PICS guidance document, which is the good practices for data management and integrity in regulated GMP, GDP environments. I've got that in front of me. I've not memorized that. That's also essential reading, I think, when we think about CSV and what is required for good CSV in it. And then in terms of, and another tip, you mentioned about top tips, screenshots, lots of screenshots, you know, get away from tables that say, this is the test, did it pass, and then just a yes or a tick. Doesn't really cut it these days. Not sure it ever did really. Screenshot, if you execute a test that shows that I shouldn't be able to do this within the software, show it, screenshot, show the warning message or the information message that comes up to say user role is not permitted to execute this action. That's what auditors want to see, not a table that's got the word yes in it or a tick.
Mhm. Yeah, because with everything else, we have data, to back up our information. And when we test lab equipment, and so we have calibrations and so on. Usually, we have numbers to back up our tests. But in this case, it's just a yes, yeah, we did it, but how can you really show that you did it? So screenshots is a great way. So can you really show everything with screenshots, or sometimes it just doesn't cut it? So can you give some more examples what you can show and provide information that it really works with this screenshot, and maybe something that still you cannot do?
So yeah, a combination of some text, of course, uh, and then screenshots to go with it. But what's really useful in screenshots, I find, what I personally do, is not just a screenshot, but you need to guide the reviewers, whoever's reviewing the work. You need to guide their eye to what you're trying to show in that screenshot. So I will typically put the screenshot into Paint. I find Paint is very useful for this. And then I'll just put a red box around what I'm trying to get them to see, or a red circle around what I'm trying to get them to look at, and then with a little bit of explanation in text within the test script. But whoever's reviewing that work will thank you for that. A really good CSV or any validation is when, if that piece of work goes to a reviewer in the QA department or to an SME, that they can follow it without having to email you or ring you to say, what did you mean by this? Or, it's just easy to follow, like following a recipe to bake a cake.
Yeah. So it's a great advice for system validation. It's a great advice also for SOPs. Not just this. When you're writing SOPs about equipment or you can do photos, when you're writing SOPs about how to use a software. It's an amazing thing to do a step-by-step screenshot. It also helps the user and guide him what he really needs to do. And it also probably, if people play less, if they just read text, they don't always understand what they need to do. They try play with the systems, and then maybe it's easier for them also to do something they shouldn't. And also when you have a screenshot, it's easy to follow. Nobody deviates from the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, in an audit situation, it's fantastic. If you have a test sheet that, has got good information in the header, who's done the test, when, what it's for, what protocol it's part of, so it's all traceable, what the test is for, the expected results and the actual results, and then all of the screenshot evidence, and then something at the end to say whether it's passed or passed with comment. Maybe there's a associated validation investigation report because something unexpected's happened. So it's all very clear. And then in terms of tests, I suppose I could give you some examples of what users, what validators should be testing with a typical GMP system. So, what a good set of test scripts would look like for a pharma system. So, just going through test sheet, test script by test script. So, the system PC is restricted sufficiently so that users cannot access any applications that they shouldn't or don't need to access. That they can't change the PC date and time because most often the application, the process application, will pick up the date and time from the PC. You might want to restrict access to the internet. Even with firewalls, the internet's a source of malware. Do you really want that on your validated system? User roles, permitted actions, denied actions for each role. And to prove that use things, that the audit trails are accurate, that the audit trails are secure, that they cannot be edited or deleted, that the reports are accurate and cannot be edited or deleted. Certainly that they can't be edited after past a point where you don't want them to be edited. So typically once e-signatures are applied, that the e-signatures are effective in locking the test or the process, that there's been a good user acceptance test. So, the users go and use the system for a typical process and show that they're happy with it. That any import-export steps are robust and work well. And then any other system-specific tests. So wherever you're making a claim that this system software has this function, you prove it, and that will vary system to system. So typically, certainly for a lab system, I work on a lot of lab systems. A typical number of test sheets would be about 12, 13, 14 test sheets. And then, with the screenshots, that's quite a chunk of work. And then with the protocol that goes with it, quite a chunk of work. And it should be, because there's, a lot of evidence needs to be shown.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for sharing this. So Daniel, is there something else that you would like to talk about? Maybe give some tips or what people should avoid doing?
So like we said earlier, don't fall into the trap of sort of blindly accepting a vendor's qualification as all that you need to do. and actually don't accept their qualification as a qualification blindly. Make sure that you review everything that the vendor does or is going to do before they do it. Make sure that things are reviewed properly after they've done it. Be careful what you buy. We said this a lot in the data integrity talk as well. Absolutely crucial. Be careful what you buy. And yeah, if you're unsure as to what needs to be done for CSV, then get in touch with someone like me. I'm happy to respond to inquiries via email, via the company's email. You can Google my company, you'll find us.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to share your contact information if somebody has any question?
Yeah, if you go to, we have a website. It's www.dataintegral.co.uk. You can get in touch that way. The phone number's on the website. The email is on the website. You can get in touch. Happy to speak to you about any projects you may have and so on. But any other contractor as well, or just someone else that at another company, go to the seminars, the forums. If you're unsure, and then just like I made the transition from lab work to validation and systems introduction. If you have the resources, let someone make that transition. And if it's factory, if someone's working in your factory and they're willing to make or want to make that transition into a validation role, let them do it, is advice I would give. Because those people become invaluable. It's not always a case of having to rely on contractors like me. You may have people within your business who could do the role, at least eventually after some training.
Yeah, that's a good advice. So train, and really train your people in computer system validation in IT, because being only in the lab or doing some work in the pharmaceutical production is nowadays it's not enough already. You need really great IT experts, and to have those IT experts also experts in production or QA and so on. It's only a benefit for every company. So thank you very much, Daniel, for this insight.
Yeah, no, it's been good to talk about it actually, and people watching talks like this, these talks are a great help as well. So I'm sure people could get in touch with you, Jan, if they need some help with any training and so on. Never be afraid to ask.
Yeah, so always ask, and I'm really always happy when people, and it happens many times, contact me with question on LinkedIn or whatever. I think that's why we're here as a community. That's why we are doing those podcasts and sharing our time and giving our time away for free, so we can grow as a community in the pharmaceutical industry. And it's not always about charging for every bit of information, but that's how we get better. We help each other and so on. So that's perfect idea, Daniel. Yeah, so I think on this note we'll finalize our great talk until next time. So thank you very much again, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Jan. Good to talk to you again.
Thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Qualitalks podcast. If you liked it, please consider sharing it with your colleagues and make sure to subscribe. Stay compliant and see you in the next one.